Alrighty, well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that we connected. I came across you on Threads, and I looked at your page and I really liked what you were doing. So, I wanted to have you on and kind of share that. So, you're a therapist who focuses on pregnancy as well as postpartum health for women.
Yeah, so I am a licensed professional counselor associate and licensed marriage and family therapist associate in the state of Texas. And so every time an associate introduces themselves, we have to say that we're an associate and then follow with our supervisor's name.
Okay.
So my supervisor's name is Dr. Felicia J. Holloway. So I am a therapist in Texas. I do focus on pregnancy, postpartum, mental health concerns, and trauma. So I blend those together with my focus. I really enjoy working with trauma around that time and helping folks like really heal or overcome or get the support that they need during those times. So.
Absolutely. I actually am a mother of 5 and dealt with postpartum myself, and so I know it can definitely be a struggle. I don't think it's talked about enough, I think it's kind of starting to, fortunately, and so it's just a really important topic. So I wanted to start out, a lot of people look at pregnancy and the emotions that come with that as starting you hear postpartum depression, postpartum depression, postpartum. I know for myself, I experienced, what do they call it? Perinatal depression. Where do you feel like emotions really start to take place when it comes to motherhood?
Mm. I mean, really, even before people even get pregnant. I think there's a lot, especially with women or people assigned female at birth, like there's a lot that's missed in education regarding hormones, regarding that impact on our emotions and things like that. So I think it starts even before then and then people's journeys to get pregnant. And when someone's realized they're pregnant, if we're really sticking to like the perinatal period, I feel like that at that point, because it could have been an accident, it could have been, a lot of different ways that they got there. And so maybe this is their first pregnancy after a loss. And if that's the case, then we really need that intervention probably before then, but at least as early as possible so that we can start to see if anything is developing, if anything is already there. So, yeah, definitely very early.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it's really nice that you said, even before becoming a mother, because yes, if you kind of scratch the surface, or if you go beneath the surface, you do see that, okay, maybe it starts during pregnancy, or maybe this wasn't planned and so forth. But there's also issues that we carry over from even childhood,
Mhm.
and we don't really realize that, whoa, maybe I wasn't prepared and I need to get a little more emotional grounding. So I think it's important to kind of shine light on that because there are times you don't even realize, like, whoa, I'm not as prepared as I thought, even though I may have planned this. So I think that's
Yeah.
also very important. Um, how do you feel like hope and fear can kind of coexist when somebody is finding out they're pregnant, whether it is planned, isn't planned? Because I think we experience a roller coaster of emotions. And so on one hand, you've got hope. On one hand, you maybe have some fear. Can you explain how you think that those can coexist and why it's important that maybe they do?
Yeah. So in any situation where someone has conceived, like you said, it's a roller coaster of emotions. And a lot of times the hope, for example, hope can exist in terms of maybe they waited a long time to conceive or to have a child, or they're really excited to like start a family and to have this kind of blank slate of a person, of a human to be able to pour into, and that feels really good. And at the same time, that fear can also be there. "Oh, what if I get it wrong? What if I get everything wrong? What if, something happens to me or something happens to the baby?" And, we have these scenarios running too in our brains, or the fear of what if I give my child the same childhood that I had, if that childhood felt unsafe, or if that childhood was violent, or any number of things. And so it's important that not only that they coexist because we know they're there, but also for us to acknowledge that, hey, like maybe I am happy to be pregnant and I'm happy to be giving birth. And also, I'm so scared of what comes next or how this pregnancy might go. And sometimes I think, I don't know if I would say media or just societally, we have glamorized pregnancy in a sense or romanticized it. At least I know I felt that way
Yeah.
when I got pregnant. I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be great. You're gonna be glowing, it's gonna be
And then
smooth.
you're like,
And yeah. And I'm like, wait, this is actually really stressful. There's
"Yeah."
a lot going on. And so I think it's important that people can learn to expect that there will be fear, learn to expect that there will be a mixture of emotions. So that way, when people do experience the fear, it's not like disappointing or it's not internalized like there's something wrong with me because I'm carrying fear and I should only be carrying hope. And so I think it's important to allow those things to exist and to acknowledge them when they do come up.
Yes, absolutely. Because in addition to what you're saying, I think I do agree that it's been glamorized. It is beautiful to be pregnant, of course, but we all experience it very differently. And I think there's a lot of mom guilt and when it comes to just motherhood in general, mom guilt's there. And so at times it's like, oh, well, today maybe I don't feel excited that I'm pregnant, or maybe today I feel worried. And I think it's important for women to know that all of those emotions are acceptable. And obviously if it gets to an extent where it becomes problematic, then you would want to seek help, of course. And why do you think that prenatal anxiety can often be overlooked?
I think it's really the screening. I think like while you're pregnant, it's all about the baby. Everyone, which is fair, like everyone wants to have a healthy pregnancy and make sure things are going smoothly. And it's a very sensitive and vulnerable time. And so it makes sense that, you're going to the ultrasounds and you're going to these appointments and, they're mostly to check up on the baby. And so I think there's not a lot of screening or enough. Well, there's definitely not enough screening of it. And I think that's how it gets overlooked because maybe people either don't know to look for it, don't have the tools to look for it, or they just are not aware that it even exists. And that's one thing. So I also worked in an OBGYN clinic in one of our integrated hospital systems here in San Antonio. And the reason for my whole job was they got a grant to increase the screening because there was such a lack of screening of mental health concerns during pregnancy and, at least in the first year postpartum. And so I've seen it firsthand where one, there's also a lot of other stuff going on. Like you may be dealing with housing issues or financial issues or concerns like that. And the social workers or people in that setting, well, life and stabilization are coming first. And they also impact mental health, but it can just easily be put to the side because we have considered these other needs as priorities. And so while we're focusing on that, we're focusing on health, there's not a lot of room for the providers to consider mental health or also for there to be time for the screenings with the way that our medical system is set up and the fast pacedness of appointments and some of these screenings for anxiety can be long like there's the GAD-7 which is relatively short, but there's something called the perinatal anxiety screening scale, and that's I think like over 30 prompts. And so it takes a lot of time not only to do the screening, but also to interpret what the client is saying. Because these screenings, I've noticed too, like I don't know what it means when it's asking that question because I'm a mental health professional. But you people who have no background in it, you're going to have to take some time to explain what it's really asking. And so when it takes time to do that and then once you know what it's really asking and once the new mom knows what it's really asking then we can actually get to the bottom of what's going on so yeah definitely multi-layer issue.
What would you advise or suggest for someone? Because a lot of times anxiety, I feel like, can fly under the radar for us because we live, especially in America and like the Western side of things, we live in a very fast paced environment where everything is go 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 and it's kind of work to live. Um, and the burnout, of course. And so I think sometimes we look at symptoms of anxiety as acceptable and normal and not as, oh, this might manifest into something more. What would you suggest or point out to a new mom who is expecting or is even planning to conceive, to keep in mind or be aware of when it comes to anxiety and getting screened or just kind of making sure it stays at the forefront of their mind?
So this is a hard one because of the reasons you said, like it presents differently for people. And also, there's not a lot of true education out there for what anxiety looks like. And so you're right, like some people do think that it's really normal to feel stress. And part of it is normal to feel stress, but say like you're noticing, hey, every day this week, I have been thinking about this one issue or this one concern, and it's kind of overtaking me, or I'm finding myself spending hours researching about it, really trying to be mindful of how much time you may be spending on a certain concern or a certain worry. I think that can be one of the telltale signs that, this is taking time away from my other functioning. Maybe it's work or relationships or my sleep, or things like that. And then I think that's maybe the threshold is if it's taking away or impacting your functioning in some other way, that, oh, there's something that might be off there, or even the physical symptoms like, oh, I wake up every day and I'm just tense,
Mhm.
or my chest is tight and I'm, feel this sense of urgency, or I feel this sense of like impending doom or something is going to go wrong. Those are some other things to be mindful of, even if you felt this your whole life. Maybe like you said, it did go under the radar, but it's still something that deserves to be addressed because you can have that baseline, but then maybe you're experiencing pregnancy and maybe there's complications, or maybe there's other stressors that are coming into play. So now your baseline is being exacerbated. And then it's really impacting you. So yeah, definitely being on the lookout for some of those key things.
Yeah, I think the recurrence really speaks out, as far as, like, even if it's a subtle symptom, just the recurrence
Hmm.
of it is definitely. And then you talk about, because I kinda looked through, your website and things, you talk about embodied healing. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that and how you work, in your practice when you say embodied healing?
Yeah. So I believe that trauma, negative experiences, even our own just lived experience is embodied. And it's not necessarily separate, like, like mind, body, things like that. It's not necessarily separate from each other. And so when I get new clients or when I'm doing my work, I incorporate the body into the work because I do believe that the body has a narrative, to be addressed and to be heard. And so there's a lot I can say about this.
Yeah,
So I'm gonna
take your
try to
time.
keep it, but when it comes to embodied healing, it's going beyond like the thought processes, because there's only so much like a positive perspective or positive outlook can do when all of what someone has experienced is inside them. It's how they move, it's how they posture, how they show up, and the sensations that they feel. And so when we're talking about embodied healing, we're talking about, of course, we have our assessments and we're going to look through the history and we're going to see what's going on like a cognitive level. And we're going to process those things from the bottom up. And so what that might look like is maybe I've struggled with anxiety, or I've had, a history of trauma, and I'm noticing like this tightness in my chest. And it keeps coming up, or there's a certain situation where it comes up. And so embodied healing goes into depth with that. And so it might trace that feeling or that sensation. And in the therapy room, we are using that, and we are asking mindful questions about what the body experiences, and we're practicing being inside of our bodies. And I think that's the biggest key too, because in our society, like it's productivity based, very fast paced. It's about what you can do and what you can accomplish, and what you can produce. And so when we are so focused on that, and like maybe things are not so stable financially, or things are not so stable in a lot of other ways, it can cause us to be disconnected or more disconnected from our bodies. Or maybe some things we experienced in childhood have caused us to be disconnected from our bodies because we learned that's how we keep ourselves safe. And that's how we learn to survive. And so when it comes to embodied healing, we are looking at what happened, and we're also processing these experiences through the physical sensations, through the body, and also like the mind. And so yeah, the embodied healing is just, it targets the experience in a more holistic way than maybe just talking it through, but actually practicing sitting in your body, for a session and feeling what's going on too. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I love that approach. It really stood out to me, and I think that anybody who comes to see you and who is already seeing you would really benefit from that because when you like you said, it's when you're embodying it, the mind-body connection is so important. It's been proven through science across all different topics. And so when you're not just on because I think we can overanalyze a lot of times, and when everything is intellectualized and therapy becomes,
Oh,
too intellectualized, then it
mhm,
stays in your head and
mhm,
you don't necessarily, act out what's being intellectualized. And so when
mhm,
you're in a therapy room, not only are you able to embody it, but you're being shown how to do it too, instead of someone telling you, go meditate and visualize this and think about this. Okay, that's great, except where do I start? For
yeah.
somebody that's maybe never done it. Um, and this to me is really, really beneficial. As someone who has also been in therapy, years ago when I first started, I had a therapist who wanted me to visualize, and I thought it was very silly. But
Mm,
once you really get in depth and you work with somebody who really knows what it means to embody, because for me, that visualization was still up here. We were not
mm,
kind of digging into it the way that you're describing. So I think that's a very, very beneficial tool, and really stood out to me about your practice. Oh, I wanted to talk about, so when someone is already pregnant, they're getting ready to give birth, or I guess I should say when they do give birth, how does it affect their nervous system and their healing?
yeah, so birth is such a huge experience, like spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally. It it's even hard to say how it will, because it affects everyone so differently based on their other, especially embodied experiences. And I say that because when you have certain types of trauma that involve the body, that experience may feel very different than someone who maybe has not had a certain type of disembodied or embodied trauma. And so in that case, the birth can feel like a not flashback, but birth can feel like a reliving of an experience that, someone felt disembodied or out of control of their body and of their self. And it's almost like an ultimate surrender too. And that's whether it's like a vaginal birth or a C-section, because either way, it's like you may not necessarily be controlling it. And so it's the type of surrendering that takes place. And if you have already a history of that kind of trauma, then it can feel like you're reliving it and you're experiencing another traumatic experience. And that may result in maybe being disembodied or disconnected from your body and the birth experience overall, or just having a negative association. So that's one of the things that can happen. And depending on the experience of pregnancy or the experience of support, that also can impact how your birth experience goes, or just the mode that you feel like your nervous system is in. Because if you already had an experience maybe of trauma and you're going through birth where your body feels like out of control of yourself, that might trigger a trauma response. So, and I think that's important to understand, because sometimes a trauma response can result in like being I feel like I'm saying disembodied and disconnected so many times, but in being disconnected from yourself, like if the trauma response is to freeze and dissociate, then you like have like left the building for this experience. And then after your birth experience, maybe you had certain expectations of it, and that's another thing you're having to deal with or process through afterwards. And then if you even consider the medical experience that a lot of women have or people have when they're going through pregnancy or even when they are in labor. And maybe their medical team did not listen to them or is not, trauma conscious or trauma informed, and they're feeling helpless. And so then maybe it's triggering another type of response for them. And so a lot of those instances, it can be re-traumatizing, it can be feel like a negative experience, and at the same time, it can feel like a liberating experience, depending on the person and like what work they've done or how much they've processed. This can feel like a reclaiming. Like I've had these disembodied experiences in the past, but now in this moment, I'm feeling empowered. I'm feeling proud, or I'm feeling strong enough to do this, or strong that I am capable of this, and giving birth. And so in that experience, birth can be healing, because it's a reclamation of something.
Yeah, that's a great point because we think about giving birth as, a lot of times, and it's not to say that it isn't, but a lot of times we can look at it as this very traumatic experience or this scary thing. But I like what you added at the end. It can also be very empowering. I've always been scared of an epidural. And one of the times I think one of the times I gave birth, no one was allowed in the room for that. And so I felt
Mhm,
like, "Oh, I didn't have any support now." But once everything was over, I felt like, "Wow, I did that, I can do it again." It
mhm,
was like, but I really didn't think I could do it beforehand. So it can be very empowering as well. And I think that kind of shows us the wisdom of how our body can work with our nervous system when it comes to giving birth,
mhm,
on the more positive side as well. And when it comes to feeling the trauma and all of these things that may not be readily apparent to outsiders, what would you offer as advice to partners of someone who is giving birth who maybe doesn't understand the impact? Maybe it's their first child, or maybe just because they're
mhm,
someone who is able to give birth, and so they don't
mhm,
understand the depth of um, how the body is being affected, how the mind is being affected. What would you advise to the support system that is around those individuals?
yeah, I would advise to really center the person who's pregnant, the person giving birth, and their needs and their preferences. And I say it like that because sometimes people don't even know like how their trauma may affect them. People are not ready to share that they've had an experience that's impacting their experience of pregnancy and birth. And I think the best and maybe safest way is to create an environment where they are heard and they are listened to and respected. So, and also that where they have autonomy and choice. And I would say definitely like censoring their choice, making sure there's consent all the way across the board, whether that's visiting baby, afterwards, or like making some type of a postpartum care plan, or whatever it is that involves that person, to really center autonomy, choice, and consent, and just be ready to listen, and be able to come alongside them. Even if like you're noticing something that maybe they're not noticing, practicing or being able to bring that up in a gentle way or in a collaborative way, can make all the difference. But the main thing is like definitely autonomy, choice, and getting to know your person.
Yes.
And making the effort to maybe ask some of those questions and give space for a response, or for them to say like what they want or don't want, or maybe what they just don't even care about. So
Yeah, it's definitely a very sensitive time when you're preparing to give birth or just even carrying a child. And so respecting what that person is asking for, whether it makes sense to you or not, obviously you
mhm,
don't want anything, crazy requests or anything like that. But um, just respecting what they're asking for because they know what their body needs. And so
Mhm.
even if it doesn't necessarily make sense to you, it's like, hey, this is what they need for me to support them and to just kind of abide by that within reason, of course. And then there's a lot of discussions around grief, just generally
Mhm.
speaking in the therapy field or just in life. And so when it comes to miscarriage or stillbirth or any kind of loss with pregnancy, how um, do you deal with grief or what can you speak to about the grief that surrounds those things?
Yeah. And this is a really interesting topic for me because when I first encountered like working with someone in grief as a therapist, I had a lot of different ideas about how that should go or how that would go. And I was like, okay, I have all these tools and like interventions and like I know all these modalities. And in my experience, the reality is in that type of grief or even a lot of different just deep grief or when life events happen out of order, like having a child pass, a lot of times it's really silence. It's really just sitting with the person and just allowing them to have space to feel whatever it is that they feel about it. I did watch a couple of different videos, like different webinars about disenfranchised grief. And a lot of times, like having a miscarriage or a stillborn or different types of perinatal loss are disenfranchised grief in the fact that they're not necessarily widely talked about. They're not necessarily just considered acceptable or reasonable to bring up. Like if someone says, "Oh yes, my family member passed," it's like okay, and I think it's more, yeah, more socially acceptable to talk about that in like every day or in passing. Whereas if someone experiences a miscarriage, it a lot of times people are feeling shame or like hiding it or and maybe internalizing the reason that it happened. And there may not be a lot of spaces where people can just feel what they feel without someone saying, "Oh, you can have another one." Or like, things of that nature that don't really carry the weight of the loss.
It
Okay.
is a difficult topic. I actually had a nephew that so he was stillborn. And my sister went on to have another child, which that can be an obstacle as well.
Mhm.
Kind of overcoming because there's probably some guilt associated with that. Um,
Mm,
is it okay to move on?
mhm,
Maybe the mother feels like she's replacing the child, trying to replace the child. So there's a lot that goes with that. And um yeah, I think it's important to make sure that that becomes a conversation that is comfortable to discuss, because a
mhm,
lot of people shy away from it. But I also think there's a lot of people that wish somebody would speak with them about it. So I think we just have to take care with how we approach those conversations, of course.
absolutely.
Even with like infertility, or a mother's who had their child in the NICU and had to stay at the hospital and leave their baby.
Mhm.
There's all these different things that go into that. And then one another thing that I wanted to touch on is we're talking about like mental health as it relates to pregnancy. The Lindsay Clancy case that's happening right now. We don't have to talk about whether she's guilty or not guilty, but um, the fact that that's being portrayed in the media so widely, I think is really bringing a focus to the mental health of mothers and the relevance and the importance of having that conversation in the public eye.
So yeah, there's definitely a lot that has come with that being such a prominent current event, and part of it is good, right? That we're bringing more awareness and attention to pregnancy, postpartum, perinatal, like mental health concerns, and I think that's usually like the first step, right? Like when something has been pushed to the side or maybe hidden for so long, there may be like an overcorrected like pendulum swing to where now everyone's like hyper focused on why are we not doing like anything about this or enough about this and really talking about it and like naming these things and sharing their experiences. So I think that is a positive thing in terms of it being other people being more aware that maybe weren't aware before, or other people sharing that experience and maybe didn't feel like they had room to express it or had the understanding of other people. And so I think with that awareness does come a deeper understanding in a lot of ways. So I think that's, yeah, really one of the really positive outcomes is that it's being talked about in spaces that maybe wouldn't have touched on that normally. And so I think other people, whether you get pregnant or not, whether you have been pregnant or you have had a child or not, if more people in our society are aware of these things, then more voices, more money, more advocacy can go to creating those structures to support the well being of moms.
Yeah, I think it's great that it's bringing the situation to light because, even though it's an unfortunate circumstance, it is bringing it to the forefront because I think a lot of people weren't even aware there was another mother, Latasha Sanders, who
Mhm.
had a similar situation, that was not covered by the media. And so, we can argue back and forth about the fairness of that, but I do think that it is bringing to light some other situations that may have been overlooked in
Mhm.
the topic in itself. Reproductive healing. Can you touch on that a little bit as well?
Yeah, it's kind of a side note. So funny when I was thinking of the name, I'm like, this perfectly describes it, but could someone looking at that name really understand what that means and what I do? And so the thought behind that is that I think reproductive mental health is just, especially for women, has been so overlooked, even in my own experiences, that it really deserved like its own focus. And reproductive mental health being, of course, like perinatal period, pregnancy, postpartum, loss, all the things associated with that, and also reproductive experiences related to like trauma or sexual trauma, and those things that have been also like pushed to the side, kind of these hidden things that people don't like to address or talk about that do happen, and it's more common than people think, and how all of these different reproductive experiences someone could have in their life can completely change either the trajectory of your life or kind of uproot your life, when we're seeing with even the two cases. And so I think there's been a lack of focus of really targeting and supporting folks during that time. And so when we talk about reproductive healing, it's looking at negative experiences, trauma, or just these transitions that have happened or that people experience that maybe they were not supported through. And they felt that lack, or there was that missing piece that they're carrying through their life. And so part of what reproductive healing does from my stance is to put that support back, whether it's reprocessing the experiences that happen and coming away with a more integrated view of yourself, or a more positive core belief about yourself, or whether it's someone currently having that experience and not having the support they need to get through it, and just being a space and just creating a space for someone to exist, someone to be and to process and to feel, to be able to go and have the rest of their life and do the things that they do, while also feeling more confident or more comfortable and more accepting of what they have experienced or what they are experiencing. And it was really also born in my own experience through pregnancy and breastfeeding and all of the different like mental health changes that I felt like no one really talked about. And so I was like, wait, like this is a thing. Like I've never had this experience before, but I'm having it now. And this is the only thing that has changed. And no one talked about, things like PMDD or things like perinatal anxiety. We say postpartum depression, but like not during pregnancy or different things like that. And so or what happens when you start breastfeeding, when you are breastfeeding, or when you end breastfeeding. And so I think just really filling that gap of support and creating a space for folks to heal from those experiences, to have those experiences fully seen, fully acknowledged.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into it all, I think, when you say reproductive healing, because yeah, I mean, you have moments where when you start breastfeeding, and then you have emotions about when you stop breastfeeding. After you give birth, you're like, oh, I miss having a baby in my belly, even though I'm holding my baby. There's so many things that we experience emotionally. Can you share, and of course, without like breaking client confidentiality, of course, could you share any success stories, about kind of helping women navigate the reproductive healing and getting back to having the compassion for themselves and feeling more confident, and just kind of some turnarounds that you've seen?
Mhm. Yeah, of course, like, I can't really share specific, success stories, but in general, I have seen, um people like so much of people just having a space to just process like without even if I'm not doing any of like these super cool like trauma processing modalities like I'm just there validating their experience and the way that just changes how people show up and there's not this especially as it relates to loss there's not this like hidden experience um there's not this like super shameful thing because they've had a space to unpack it and they've had a space to process exactly what they're feeling about it in the context of their whole world. And so I think that's been a huge success in that sense. And then also just witnessing, especially working in like the hospital setting, one, witnessing how much support just was not there or, like, has not necessarily been there, and then just the addition of having a counselor, like, in the clinic or, like, in, like, the labor and delivery to check in, on different things. So many things have been caught that way. So many maybe it's, like, safety concerns or maybe it's, the onset of psychosis or something like that. I think there have definitely been a lot of key moments that I've realized, like, wow, just having someone that knows enough to be there to support someone through their experience has really changed this person or this person's perception of support. Um,
Great answer. Great answer.
Okay.
And then as far as like, I want to kind of jump back to a little more of a focus on you and how you got into the work. Kind of what got you started, like where the passion, the fire kind of sparked for you.
Mhm. Yeah, so I was like a really sensitive kid, always. And I cared a lot about other people. I cared a lot about fairness. I cared a lot about justice in so many different ways. And so when I got to high school, I ended up going to an early college and I was really focused on finishing and I had a lot going on at that point, but I also found myself being really interested in like social justice and being really interested in the disparities that existed in the past and that still exist today, even though at that time I didn't necessarily have language for it because I myself, I'm a first generation college graduate. Came from a low income household, like we lived in Section 8 until I went to college. And so there's a lot that I experienced as a Black woman growing up in those circumstances that I didn't necessarily have like the language for, but I had a large reflection of what that experience was. And so when I got to college, and I went to the University of Texas at Austin, which was a huge culture shock.
Sure.
Um, yeah, so I went there and I started off as a business major and I hated I hated my first semester as a business major. I was just like, this seems like dumb. Like it seems really meaningless. I was able to like some of the classes I was able to like barely even go to class and still do really well because I was just reading the book. And I was like, I don't want to major in something I can just read about on my own and do well. I want to have this experience in college with what I'm learning, and I had taken a class what was it? I think it was Race in the Age of Obama. That was the class,
Interesting. Okay.
and it was taught by a historian, Dr. Leonard Moore, but, that was something that was when I first started to have the language to like understand my own experience and understand all the different barriers and the different systems that were at play that were affecting my life and everyone else's life and how I came to be in that moment. So then I changed my major to Black Studies. I started to get really into like sociology and history and different things like that, and history of like the politics. And I was really passionate about it, got really involved in different things on campus. And then I took a class called The Psychology of the African American Experience. And I was like, mind blown. Because I I thought I wanted to do psychology, but I didn't like regular psychology. I was in the class and I was like, yeah, I'm not really feeling this. But I did like the study of people and behavior and culture. And so when I took that class, I was like, oh, there's a way to conceptualize like the mental wellness and mental health that's not necessarily just this like one track minded approach that takes into consideration all these different things and experiences that people have. And I was like, I really like this. And in my first couple years of college, I was learning about like racism and capitalism and sexism and all the things. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna dismantle all these things, and I'm gonna go and I'm gonna, change the world by dismantling racism.
You
And
sound
then I
like me.
realized, yeah, and I was like, as time went on, and I got really, I don't know if I would call it burnout because I didn't really have that language, but I was like, man, this is exhausting trying to
Yeah.
dismantle all these things. And, I really can't do it, even though, there's a few of us here and we're doing the protests and doing the sit ins and all the things. And I'm like, well, maybe this is not the approach that I want to take because while also on that journey, I had realized my own humanity and my own capacity and like just my sense of self. And I was like, well, if we're going to be in this life a long time and it's going to take more than a year to dismantle racism, then I might need a different way that I want to like change the world or contribute. And that's when I really started experiencing and getting into like the psychology and the mental health part. And I was like, whoa, this is this is where I see myself. Like I feel like I can really make an impact here with all of this knowledge and help people at least survive these systems. Since we're most likely not going to be able to just dismantle them. But when someone has that power or that mental wellness, then they are able to live and navigate their life in a way that is liberating. And like that's a part of it too. It's not just let's, break everything down. It's also that individual level of liberation, of freedom, of wellness. And so that's when I kind of shifted gears and I was like, okay, I think, yes, I want to work in mental health and I want to make sure I'm addressing disparities, but I don't know how or where I want to do this. But I was also really passionate about women's empowerment and women's health. So, and it's so interesting too, because my mom growing up, she worked in a women's health clinic. And we would, sometimes go to work with her when we're sick and things like that. And so I think that played a little bit of a part and like influenced just my perspective in life. And so I really also wanted to focus on empowering women because of our position in society. And it was really became about, okay, I want to make the most change that I can, make the most impact that I can, and really support some of the most vulnerable. And so I was going on that path. And then after graduating, I worked in a women's health clinic too. And I was a medical receptionist, but I also helped process like applications for termination and a lot of different things like that. And so I enjoyed the work, but it was also kind of depressing, of course. And so I was like, I want to be a support, but maybe not in this way. That clinic ended up closing down because of course, Texas laws and
Oh,
things like
okay.
that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, but it really, like, I was there for a couple months, but it really impacted me. And I was like, this is where there's so much support needed. This is where everything intersects. Like, during like pregnancy, postpartum, like, this is where all these different structures of your life are showing up. in a lot of different ways. And so I was like, yeah, this is what I want to work with. And then I was still taking, I think maybe a gap 2 years. Maybe it was during COVID. It's like everything's a blur during that time. But yeah, so I was taking a gap year, just trying to figure out what direction I wanted to go to, if I wanted to do social work, if I wanted to do counseling. Um, and so then my now husband and I, we decided to have a baby. And we did, we got pregnant, but it was like in the second wave of COVID when the vaccines were really like all the vaccines were starting to come out. And that was, yeah, that was one of the most, I think, stressful experiences
Man.
that I've ever had. And it was like just the thing of taking a vaccine or not. Sorry, were you gonna say something?
No, 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 I said, "Man, me and you both." I was
Oh
pregnant
yes.
during COVID as well and got COVID while pregnant, so it was stressful. I remember that time frame. Yeah.
And yeah, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is like too much." And I didn't know, like at that time, I didn't really know what was going on. So my sister, so I have an older sister, I have a mom, like I have a bunch of family members that have been pregnant before. And I don't know why I had like these different assumptions about it, but I was not thinking that it would go that way. So I knew that I was pregnant like before we even took the test because I've always had a sensitivity to hormones.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, something feels out of, I'm like, something's really out of whack right now.
Yeah.
And so then we took the test and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm pregnant. Like that makes so much sense. I don't like mentally, I could notice that things were different. And so we're going through pregnancy. It's COVID. We're in our 20s. Like looking back, I'm like, what were we thinking? But we're going through it and we're and that experience, I'm having so much anxiety and I didn't even understand it. I just knew I was like really nauseous and I was having so much nausea. And I went to a midwife and they were not very helpful because
Oh.
I told them like, I have a history or in my intake paperwork, I have a history of anxiety. And things like that. If something feels off, and they were very dismissive, and I was like, "Oh, it's fine. This is normal." And I'm like, "Are you sure?" Because it seems like it's really like not like something seems
Yeah.
like it's really going on. And so they were like, "No, no, it's normal." And I don't know. After walking out of that office, I was like, "This doesn't feel very normal." And so I was talking to my sister and my mom about it, and they were like, especially my sister, she's super outgoing, super strong, like advocacy. So she was like, "No, you need to get another doctor ASAP because if they're not going to listen to you, mm-mm."
Right.
And so I got some recommendations from some friends and found a new doctor. And at our first appointment, she was like, I noticed, you have a history of anxiety. If things are getting bad, you let me know and we will, take steps to address it. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was having really severe morning sickness. And I learned through treating the anxiety that my morning sickness was actually like anxiety or like the intensity that it was because once I started treating the anxiety part, then the morning sickness also like went down. And I was like, whoa, like I don't feel nauseous anymore. And then I noticed like I'm feeling nauseous when I'm like thinking, having racing thoughts, or I'm, thinking about things or worrying about things. And I was worrying about a lot of things.
Of course. Yeah.
Because I'm first time mom, it's COVID, we have a lot going on. And so during that time, it was just so eye-opening. Like it was like, whoa, this is not at all what I expected this experience to be. I felt so lucky that I had my mom and my sister in my corner, and also really lucky that my mom was able to. So she funded me having a therapist through pregnancy and I think the beginning of postpartum, and that was really helpful for me. Like I really needed that, and I just never thought that like, wow, this life transition requires so much support. And I'm looking at people around me that I know did not have that support at all, and I see the difference. And I'm like, this is a huge gap. Like, why has no one ever talked about having a therapist for a pregnancy or like this big transition or, that this support might be needed. And I'm like, yeah, this is so important. And I think a lot of times, sometimes therapy can be considered something that, oh, rich people do, or like Black people don't go to therapy, or, all these stigmas out there. But for me, I found like each time, like I found a Black therapist and having that and a therapist that had been a mom, and being able to really feel seen and understood and all of the anxiety that I was having was just so important. And it was at that moment, like after giving birth, I'm really thankful I had a supportive partner because I feel like my postpartum experience felt better than pregnancy.
Oh,
Because it was really nice. And after that, I was like, yeah, this is what I want to target because I feel like there's not a lot of education out there about what kind of support all across the board there needs to be during pregnancy. And there's not a lot of representation of support. Like the therapists I had were cash pay. They didn't, take insurance at that time. And so just even accessing that, I think was really, I don't know, it's like reflecting on it's really eye-opening that it is so hard to get access to get connected with that kind of mental health support and that no one's really like looking for it. You do the assessments or you do the little questionnaires, but there's not follow-up. Or like I had a medical assistant ask me like, "Are you having any depression symptoms?" I'm like, no." Okay.
right.
And then it's like no to everything. And so I think just, yeah, just having someone that's looking for it, that's screening for it, that's following up with you about it is really important. And that really ignited my passion for specifically like pregnancy and postpartum, as you see it. And then, the maternal mortality rate for Black women is
Oh,
insane, like insanely disproportionate. And a lot of that has to do with support and advocacy and providers, bias and all those different things. And I'm like, this is a great way for me to help address that and to not only address like these disparities that are physical, through mental health, but also there's so much trauma that people experience, especially if you're a racial minority or if you have any other identity that is marginalized or oppressed, you're experiencing a greater level and more impact of these different childhood traumas or different traumatic experiences. And in order to, I guess, is my contribution also to building a stronger community and society is to help moms and to help parents learn how to process some of those experiences so that they can create and raise like emotionally regulated, emotionally intelligent, and children who are well and who take care of themselves and each other and community.
absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. You gave me way more information than I even was asking, and then I say that in a good way. I'm really appreciative of it because there's so many things I want to go back and touch on that you just mentioned. But starting out with like having that passion for social justice and just
Mhm.
growing up as being like a very sensitive child, that is very relatable. And I think that it translates over into your work,
Mhm.
because I think I read too about just being very inclusive. You're a very inclusive therapist, which I do want you to talk about more in just a minute too. But I really appreciate that you were able to identify something where there was a need, even if it's
Mhm.
not often talked about or people don't want to look at. A lot of people want to look the other way at some of these things. Like when you talk about the marginalized communities or um, the rate of death among Black women in childhood.
Mhm.
These are a lot of things that people turn their head away from because they don't want to get too political or to this or to that. And it's not even so much that you have to, I don't know if you would call it political, maybe you do. But I think just being bold enough to take the step to address what needs to be addressed, even how you
Mhm.
tie it into helping the mothers and the partners so that down the line the children are emotionally regulated.
Mhm.
These things are so important. And just hearing you speak about your experience and what led you to this point, I really, really believe that you're serving your purpose and your calling. I mean, that's just what I feel as you're speaking. And so I hope that you're able to help many, many people, as I'm sure you already have, but continue to do so because we need more people like you. And if you could, I wanted you to touch on the inclusivity in your practice too.
Mhm. Is there like any specific?
No, 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 no. You did. So you had mentioned in the beginning. So I picked up on you mentioning female assigned at birth, uh,
Mhm.
the marginalization, like we just talked about, of like some
Mhm.
um communities that are maybe not as represented, or um, even just going into the office and they say, fill out this questionnaire, are you depressed, and move on. Because I had that
Mhm.
experience and I suffered severe depression on one of my pregnancies to where I was hospitalized, and that was overlooked, it was never followed up with again, and even I'm throwing in a lot here, but there's a lot that's coming back to me that you mentioned, the advocacy, like your sister advocating
Mhm.
for you, because I even switched doctors after having 2 babies and stuck with another doctor who was a Black
Mhm.
woman instead, and she was much more caring for me specifically, and so if you'll just kind of speak on just kind of those various topics,
Yeah.
the advocacy, the inclusivity, all of that.
Yeah. So, so yeah, the inclusivity is something that is really core to me. And I do think it comes from me like having identities that are historically like left out of the conversation, left out of the space, just as a black woman that grew up like low income, that grew up, in Section 8, that has all these like intersecting like odds against me. Sometimes is what it feels like. And just knowing that and having felt that before, to me, it's like a no-brainer to make every effort that I can to see anyone or help anyone feel seen and welcome that does come to me for services or support or assistance, because I know the difference that it can make and I've seen the difference that it can make. And so, and of course, I'm like far from perfect. Have a lot of work to do, of course, to deconstruct things, and especially language around like the perinatal period. And so it's always a work in progress, but it's something that is just so genuinely important to me, because the language that is used, the images that are on a website can dictate whether someone feels safe to access this, or whether someone feels welcome to access this. And I think that that's really like overlooked, especially, I mean, in a lot of spaces, especially in healthcare. And so to me, like that is so important, because how can I help, or how can I, make the impact if someone doesn't even feel welcome to come into the room? Or if someone doesn't even see themselves or feel like they can access, the help. So then, really, really thinking about that, having a lot of conversations about that, especially in my other job where I worked in. So it was the county hospital district. So we're seeing people who are, typically are either uninsured, underinsured, have Medicaid, all the things, have a lot of barriers to accessing care. And to me, especially language barriers. And to me, it's just so important, because these are the people that have the most disparities, that are impacted the most by if they don't receive care. And so that has just really tagged along with the passion and with just me like doing this work. Um,
Yeah, and I think it's important because, like I mentioned, a lot of times, some people want to look the other way when it comes to some of these
mm,
topics and addressing the people that are often overlooked in society. Even with access to care, it can be difficult because maybe they do have Medicaid, but there's not many doctors who offer accepting
mhm,
Medicaid, or, all these different things. And so I just think it's really important, because there's a place for everyone, you know,
mhm,
and I think that because I'm one of those people that I believe in living in the gray. So I
mhm,
don't think there is a right or a wrong. I don't think that necessarily should be telling someone how they should or shouldn't be or how, all of these different things. I think that as I like to try to look at everyone as a human. We are
Yeah.
a part of the collective humanity. And so it's necessary that we're making sure that we are all treated to
Mhm.
a level of equality that is humane, for one another. So um, I think making sure that we're inclusive rather than exclusive is really important. And so that's
Yes.
something that I love about what you do and just the boldness that it takes to address those things. Um, and then the advocating is another thing that I
Mhm.
want you to touch on. So a lot of times we will see doctors and they will maybe hear us, but not
Mhm.
through.
Mhm.
Being a new mom, even in your situation, some of us maybe what if we don't have the sister or the mother,
Mhm.
If you could kinda speak to how important it is to advocate for yourself, even if you're I always say, "Do it trembling if you must, but do it."
Yeah.
So, in terms of advocating for ourselves, I think it's really important. So, if you'll kinda touch on that and offer whatever advice that you have for someone who is maybe not the most outspoken or is more introverted when it comes to that.
Yes. Oh my gosh, and it's also kind of sad, like the amount of self-advocacy that needs to happen just to get care or just to be heard. I think that was something I did not realize going into it, just how much I would have to speak up for myself or how much I would have to have someone else speak up for me because it's not the default. And I think there's a lot of layers to that. Like, that we have a very overloaded medical system and healthcare workers. And there's a lot that gets missed in general, just in those settings because of the pace and because of the requirements and all of the things. And so it kind of puts the onus on the patient to be heard. And that can be really difficult. And I am not like, it's interesting because I do consider myself a strong advocate, but I still have my own like interpersonal things and so it is hard for me in those moments when I'm like stressed out, anxious about the pregnancy. I'm going to see this maternal, what is it called? Like fetal medicine, like specialist. And that was one example is like I didn't want a male doctor. I just didn't. I was like, I didn't feel comfortable with it. And at that practice, they rotated. And at first I had a female doctor and then it was male. And I was like, this is like we're talking about like really sensitive things. We're talking about things that are really emotional for me. This is my preference. And so I had to go and like tell them. And of course I felt like I was being difficult because they marked it in my chart that, my requests. And sometimes you have to be okay with being difficult because what's most important is your comfort and safety. And that's something that comes up a lot in my work is this feeling of not wanting to rock the boat or not wanting to be difficult. And part of it is socialization. Some of it is like childhood attachment things. It's a lot of things that go into that, but it's really important to push to push that if you know like something doesn't feel right or something is not right because anytime someone has told me that even if the doctor initially dismissed it they ended up being right that something was off and so I think definitely building that muscle or having people around you that can advocate for you. So I also like this route because sometimes it's hard to change that type of pattern, that interpersonal pattern in yourself or people pleasing in 9 months of pregnancy that's been happening for years. And so to have people in your corner that you know are like super outspoken, like you having friends or family members that you know do not care how they come across or do not care how they look, they're going to make sure things are okay. And so having even during like the labor and delivery process, my sister making sure things are like going well. So, COVID, I was only allowed two people. So my husband and my sister, and he's a first time parent too. So
Yeah.
he was a little bit lost. He was just trying to be supportive. But my sister she was very serious. So she works in healthcare too. So she's like, no, this is, like making sure that things are going the way that they're going. And which I didn't know a lot about doulas at the time.
Mm.
But if I did have like advice, especially when it comes to advocacy, either like, really hype yourself up, try to build that muscle, and find people to that you know will support you. And so I know in San Antonio, there's like an organization that offers free doula services to pregnant moms. So I would say, like, really look into, especially if finances are an issue or a barrier, look into your area, look into resources to really have a support team around you. Of course, it's nice if your doctors and your nurses and your healthcare providers are super supportive and super great and listen to you and help you feel listened to and understood, but that's sadly not the reality for a lot of people. And so, really being willing to like build your team, and don't be embarrassed by yourself advocating or people advocating for you, because that can come up too, but at the end of the day you have a right. You have a right to receive the care that you need. You have a right to be comfortable um with the care that you're receiving, and to be listened to and to be respected. And so, really, even if you have to repeat it to yourself or write it down and put it on the mirror, reminding yourself that you have a right to this. You have a right to speak up for yourself and to express your needs, and really carrying that with you throughout this process, because it will take some advocacy, especially if you even have like a different culture or you have different practices than what's accepted in the medical system, and really ensuring that you're heard, because legally you probably have the right to, but in practice, it can be a little bit more difficult because other people's, unfortunately, preferences or their routines of doing things are louder or stronger than your individual preferences or cultural desires or different things like that.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely important to be listened to. I've climbed that uphill battle. Like I said, I ended up switching doctors because I was trying to advocate for myself and it was not being well received. And so it did for me get to a point where I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna have to just get to the point where I see somebody else. And then another thing before we kind of get to the end here, there's two things I wanted to touch on. So one is you mentioned, and this is so happy for you that this is the case. But you mentioned having a very supportive partner. Um,
Hmm.
there are other situations, obviously, where some people don't have that. And
Hmm.
in those cases, um, like I know in my first pregnancy, I was really close to my mom. And so she was making me meals and waking me up,
Hmm.
feeding me, and it was fabulous. So thank you, mom. But then there was a period of time where we did kind of become estranged by the time I had my fifth child. So I didn't have as much support, or I had poor support. And so
Hmm.
looking back in retrospect, especially because I've had 500,000 children, I can see where now it's like, oh, okay, well, if I was ever to have a pregnancy again where I didn't have the support, here's a couple things that I would maybe do. What could you suggest in that situation for a mother who is maybe struggling or kind of fearful of giving birth because she doesn't have the support that she needs? Um, what advice would you offer? Like maybe joining a community or what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that even comes to mind is one, like, give yourself grace.
Mm.
Like, having a child with no support is unimaginably difficult, and we're also living in like a social system that does not provide a safety net or support, and so know that it's not you, and that you are just kind of surviving your context, to kind of take some of that weight off. And yeah, I do recommend. Now, in my experience, the mom groups are a little bit wild. It's really hit or miss.
I
Um, but I think community is so important, and being um it's okay to be creative and be like flexible. Maybe your community is not like a Facebook mom group. Maybe it's church. Maybe your community is like people you have game nights with. Maybe it's some of your like online gaming friends or something like that. And so I think really using what you have is really big, and just being where you are. Try to find things that are already there and already accessible, because I know, like, say if you're already working a lot of hours, you don't even really have time to nurture relationships like that. We're all isolated. A lot of people are struggling. Like there's a lot of barriers to having that social support. But if you know, like maybe you live in a neighborhood and maybe there's like a neighborhood group or something like that, and starting small can help too. So I would say that. I would say I know Postpartum Support International has like online support groups, and some of the different state chapters have meetups. So those kinds of things can be helpful, and being connected with those resources. And I would also say use your providers offices. At least from what I know from my own experience and like attending one, my own experience working in one, a lot of OBGYN offices are connected with different community groups or different resources, or some of them have social workers that can help you connect to resources. So if there really aren't like a lot of options for you, then don't be afraid to reach out to them and to connect with the resources that they have, because social support mixed with like partner support is one of the number one protective factors when it comes to like perinatal mental health. And so we definitely want to try to get into some type of support system where you can, or at least being able to like nurture yourself. I think those things are important. And then the kind of back end of that is that sometimes like people have support that's not really supportive. Or having your parents or having family, but maybe they don't really know how to emotionally support you, or maybe they don't have like resources to physically or materially support you. I would say meet those people where they are too. If you really need the support, if you know maybe mom will buy everything on your registry, but you can't talk to her about your postpartum concerns. And so accepting like the limitations, but also using what's there if that's what they're offering, and then if you can use that to create other types of support for yourself. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then in closing, my last question for you. So just kind of talking to the audience, anyone who's listening today, if they could take anything from this conversation and then also an
Mhm.
additional piece that is not part of this conversation in terms of getting through a difficult time when it comes to motherhood, pregnancy, all of that, even grief. What would you offer in terms of advice for hope and healing?
Mm, I would say from this conversation, to well, kind of two things, but like give yourself grace and use what's there. Because this is hard. Like this stuff is hard. Like just being a human being right now is really hard.
Yeah.
And so know that like it's not you. Like this is legitimately difficult thing to be experiencing, and just giving yourself some of the grace that like you're a human, you have a capacity, you have limits, and it's okay to honor those. Now, from what's not a part of this conversation is literally do whatever works for you. If it I mean, I say, like, maybe as long as it's not hurting anyone, but if it works for you, it doesn't matter how outlandish it sounds, like, do it. If you need, like, a certain type of, like, self-care or, whatever the case is, like, just do what works for you. Get creative if you need to, and really I would say, like, throw caution to the wind in a sense, like I said, as long as it's not hurting you or anyone else,
Right.
do like, really take the liberty to do what works for you. Like, now is not the time for, like, external validation or acceptance or approval. If something is working for you and keeping you healthy and keeping your well-being intact and keeping baby and family healthy, I don't care what social media says. Do what's good for you.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you so, so much, Harmony. I really enjoyed this conversation. Can you please let us know where if somebody wants to have therapy with you or become a client, or just kind of look into you, where can they find you or connect with you?
Yeah, so my threads, my Facebook, and my Instagram are all Harmony S. Smith. And then my website is harmonysmith.com. My booking links are on all the platforms, either in my bio, or like, and I have a bio site list link in all of the bios and platforms. You can find me there, and I try to make it as easy as possible. No unnecessary back and forth. So you could just click my booking link if you're ready to schedule an intake. And yeah, that's how you can get connected with me. And then I also have my email in um, on my website and across the platforms as well.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much. I really appreciate you being on today.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. So happy to speak on this.
Thank you.